Hey, what's up? Hey, 2-5 solving quadratic equations by completing the square, guys. Completing the square. Um, we'll look at some perfect square trinomials. Let's get started. First off, guys, examples of perfect square trinomials. An example of a perfect square trinomial is this. See how this first term, all right, you have ax squared plus bx plus c. Our constant is a perfect square. And our first term is a perfect square. So again, the constant is a perfect square, and the first term is a perfect square. This whole entire first term, even if there's a number right here. All right. Now, we look at these perfect square trinomials, just some examples. X squared is a perfect square, so is 9. X squared is a perfect square, so is 25. X squared is a perfect square, so is 36. These are all examples of perfect square trinomials. All right. To create a perfect square trinomial in the following perfect square trinomial, the constant term is missing. See, the constant is missing. All right. So what you use to find the constant is this equation right here, b divided by 2 squared. All right. Or this expression, b divided by 2 squared. All right. Or formula, as you guys like to call it, b divided by 2 squared. Now, this is not going to be provided for you. This is something that you need to learn. It's just b. This is b. We're going to divide it by 2, then square it. B divided by 2 squared, okay? Take 14, divided by 2, that's 7. 7 squared is 49. All right, so now this is a perfect square trinomial, okay? Take the middle value, B, divided by 2, then square it, okay? So right here, we're going to create some perfect square trinomials. Again, B divided by 2 squared. So right here, we take 20. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 10 squared is 100. This is now a perfect square trinomial. Right here, b is negative 4. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. Now this is a perfect square trinomial. You take this one, 5. 5 divided by 2, then square it. Well, 5 divided by 2 does not divide evenly. All right, so we will leave it as 5 over 2. Then we square it. All right, when we square that, we get 25 over 4. Now, this is a perfect square trinomial. 5 divided by 2 does not divide evenly. All right, so we still square it. B divided by 2 squared, 25 over 4. Now, this is a perfect square trinomial. Okay. To solve a equation by completing the square. All right, here's an equation. All right, it says step 1. Move the quadratic term and linear term to one side. All right, so the quadratic and the linear to one side. All right, or we could have just said move the constant to the other side. All right, so we're going to move the constant to the other side like this. X squared plus 8x. And I always like to put a space like we had that space up above. All right, equals, if you add 20 to the other side, you have 20 plus a space. Now, I put these 2 spaces here because we're going to actually use our perfect square on both sides. All right. That says find a term that completes the square on the left side of the equation. Add the term to both sides. So that's why I put 2 spaces. All right, put the 2 spaces because when I find that perfect square, when it says find a term that completes the square, when I complete this square, I'm going to add that term to both sides. So right here, remember, it's b divided by 2, and then we square it. So in this case, it's 8 divided by 2. And then we're going to square that. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to put 16 here, and I'm going to put 16 here. Okay? So now it says factor the perfect square trinomial on the left side of the equation. All right? Now to factor this, guys, here's how you factor it. What 2 factors of 16 will add to give me 8? That's going to be x plus 4 and x plus 4 because 4 times 4 is 16 and 4 plus 4 is 8. All right, so we're just going to write this as, see how it's 2 of them? X plus 4, x plus 4. I'm going to write x plus 4 squared like that. All right, and on this side, I'm going to simplify the right side of the equation. So 16 plus 20 plus 16 is 36, okay? All right. Now, Again, I just wrote it twice, guys, because I squared it because the binomial was twice. Now let's just take the square root of each side. So now see how I have this binomial squared equals 36? Well, now we're going to solve it by taking the square root on both sides. So right here, the square root and the square negates each other, it cancels. And I'm left with x plus 4, and over here I end up with plus or minus 6. All right, so take the square root of each side. Now set up two possibilities and solve. So now I'm going to subtract 4. All right, minus 4 on both sides. Now I know you're thinking, oh, 6 minus 4. Hold on, slow your roll. You have two possibilities, like I said. All right, and the two possibilities are this. The first one is, and I'm gonna do it here in green so you can see it. The first one is positive 6 minus 4. All right, and that's 2. And the other one is negative 6 minus 4. And that is negative 10. So we have our two solutions. X equals 2 and x equals negative 10. All right, those are our two solutions. Okay. Example 2. Now, the first thing I want to point out is, see this 2 here? All right, we're going to complete the square with this problem here, but first, I wanted to point out that, see how these problems are all x squared? Even this one is x squared. The leading coefficient is 1. Well, what we're going to do with this next problem is we're going to get this to look like those. We're going to turn this into an x squared. So how we do that is we're going to first start by dividing everything by this leading coefficient, which is 2. We're going to divide out 2. And why 2? Because it's the leading coefficient. So that way I get rid of that. It's x squared. Right here it's negative 7 over 2 doesn't divide evenly. So it's just negative 7x over 2. Right here 12 divided by 2 is 6. And 0 divided by 2 is 0. All right. So now this is x squared. All right. The next thing we're going to do is move the constant. Like we did with the last problem, move the constant. So I have x squared minus 7x over 2, all right, equals negative 6. Well, actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go ahead and put our space in there. All right, so plus our space, all right, equals negative 6. 0 minus 6 is negative 6, plus my space, okay? So now, we got to look at the whole b over 2 squared equation. All right. Remember, this is what we use to actually complete this square. All right. So b is 7 over 2, guys. This is b. This is b. All right, right here. Negative 7 over 2. So if I take b, negative 7 over 2, right? And we're going to divide by 2. And then we're going to square it. Again, this is b. See, b divided by 2, that's 2. Then we got to square it. B divided by 2 squared. Now, you could very well do this in the calculator. You could do this in the calculator. Or I'm going to do it by hand. All right, so since this is 2, I'm going to make it a fraction over a fraction. 2 over 1 is the same thing as just 2, okay? So now I have a fraction divided by a fraction. Well, I'm going to use the keep, change, flip method. Keep the top, change from division to multiplication, and flip that. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you divide by 2 fractions, if you flip the bottom, you can multiply. All right, so now it's a multiplication problem. So this gives me negative 7 times 1. And 2 times 2. All right. So b divided by 2 squared gave me negative 7 over 4. And then I'm going to square it to get 49. Negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. And 4 squared is 16. So I have 49 over 16. Okay. Now, the left side, you have to factor the left side. Well, factoring is kind of simple. See how this is negative? So it's going to be x minus, now the square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 16 is 4. So x minus 7 over 4 squared. By the way, guys, when you factor a perfect square trinomial, when you factor the completing the square that you just made, it's always going to be squared, all right, like in the last example. Now over here, I have -6 times 49 over 16. Well, you got to have common denominators to add these, right? So now if I make this bottom 16, where I got to multiply this top by 16 as well, which is going to be -96. So -96 plus 49 is going to be -47 over 16, all right? So now from here, I just solve this, guys. To get rid of this square, I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So I'm left with x minus 7 over 4, because these cancel, equals plus or minus. And I'm going to go ahead and do this, guys. See that negative right there? Well, here, let's write it out. -47 over 16. All right. Now, before I add that over, I'm going to do this. X minus 7 over 4 equals plus or minus, see that negative? Remember the negative underneath the radical, the square root of -1. And then we have the square root of 47 over the square root of 16. The reason I did that is because this is a perfect square. I can simplify that. Let me expand this page. Now, jumping down to here. X minus 7 over 4 equals, remember, square root of -1 is I. We have plus or minus I, radical 47 over 16. Over 4. Square root of 16 is 4. So now I just need to add by 7 over 4 on both sides. So we end up with x being 7 over 4. Remember the plus or minus is right here. So plus or minus I square root of 47 over 4. Here is our final solutions right there. All right. You have x equals 7 over 4 plus the square root, or I square root of 47 over 4, and you have x equals 7 over 4 minus, that's the plus or minus, I square root of 47 over 4. All right, so there we go, 2 answers. All right, now for class, we have these problems we're going to practice in class together. And then here's the homework, guys. Make sure you, well, here, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the answers for you and use those as a reference to solving out or work your problems out to try to get these answers. All right, so here's the answers. So here are your solutions. All right, x is 11 and -9. All right, A. B is 1 and B is -3. There you go. All right, for 8, I wrote it 2 different ways. If you simplify it, all right, if you simplify it, it should be here because -2 over 2 is actually -1. So, couple different ways to look at it, man. But hey, listen, this is 2-5, okay? So, hopes this helps.